My name is Cecilia Moss, a retired Sergeant First Class of the United States Army. I have lived my entire life by a code of honor, wearing medals that were paid for in blood, sweat, and sacrifice. I thought I knew what a battlefield looked like. But this morning, at the funeral of my father-in-law, a decorated Marine colonel, my honor was stripped away in front of everyone I know. Just as I was about to step into the family limousine, my mother-in-law, Samantha, blocked my path. She looked at my dress blues, the uniform I wore out of respect for her husband, with absolute disgust. Then, in front of hundreds of Virginia's elite, she hissed, "Know your place, Cecilia." She pointed a manicured finger toward the back of the lot. "Don't taint this family's image with that coarse soldier attire. You look ridiculous. Go walk with the help." But the knife twisted deeper. My husband of 23 years just stood there. He adjusted his silk tie and looked away, pretending he didn't even know me. I stepped back, just as I was ordered. But they made a fatal mistake. They don't know that right here, inside the breast pocket of my jacket, resting against my heart, lies a secret order from the dead man they are burying. A weapon that will turn these elites into homeless beggars before the day is done. Leave a comment saying, "Justice," if you believe dignity is worth more than a bank account. Hit that subscribe button right now to witness how an old soldier teaches this family a lesson about their true place in this world. The November wind in Virginia has a way of cutting right through you, finding the spaces between your ribs and settling there. It was whipping through the church courtyard today, carrying dead red oak leaves across the gray stone path. But the chill in the air was nothing compared to the frost radiating from the people surrounding me. I stood there, spine rigid, chin up, a pillar of steel in a sea of soft cashmere and Italian wool. I wasn't wearing black. I was wearing my army dress blues. The dark blue coat was pressed to perfection. The light blue trousers with the gold stripe ran straight down to my shine shoes. On my left chest, my rack of ribbons and medals caught the weak autumn sunlight. This wasn't a fashion statement. It was an order. My father-in-law, Andrew, had gripped my hand on his deathbed and whispered, "Send me off like a soldier, Cecilia, not like a rich man." But as I stood near the curb, I felt the eyes, the heavy-lidded, judgmental stares of the Virginia old money crowd. I heard the whispers behind lace fans and gloved hands. To them, my service stripes didn't represent sacrifice. They represented the working class. The Rust Belt dirt I'd tried to scrub off for 20 years. They looked at my uniform as if I were the parking valet, or part of a circus act hired to entertain them. A sleek, black Cadillac Escalade rolled up to the curb, its tires crunching softly on the gravel. This was the lead car, the family car. The rear door opened and Samantha Morrison stepped out. She didn't just exit a vehicle, she made an arrival. At 75, she was still a terrifying force of nature, draped in black furs that probably cost more than my entire military pension. A driver rushed to steady her elbow, but she shook him off. She adjusted her wide-brimmed hat, her eyes scanning the crowd until they locked onto me. I took a step forward, intending to join my family, to join my husband. "Stop right there." Samantha's voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a razor-sharp frequency that cut through the murmur of the crowd. She marched toward me, the diamonds on her fingers flashing. She stopped inches from my face, invading my personal space, her perfume overpowering the scent of the fallen leaves. "Know your place, Cecilia," she hissed. The words were low, venomous, meant only for me and the humiliatingly large circle of bystanders. She flicked her hand toward my chest, her finger hovering over my medals as if they were stains. "What on earth were you thinking? Showing up in this costume? You look like a doorman." My jaw tightened, my molars grinding together. "It was Andrew's request, Samantha. He wanted—" "I don't care what a dying, delirious man mumbled to you," she snapped, her voice rising now, performing for the audience. "I am the head of this family now. I decide the image we project. And look at you. Stiff, coarse, blue-collar. You are ruining the aesthetic of this funeral." She pointed a long, manicured finger toward the rear of the procession, way back where the catering vans and the staff cars were idling. You will not step foot in my limousine. Get back there and walk with the servants. That is where you belong. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my face remained a stone mask. I didn't look at her. I looked past her shoulder, searching for the one person who should have been my shield. Justin. My husband stood by the open door of the Escalade. He was handsome in his custom-tailored suit, the picture of grieving dignity. We had been married for 23 years. I had carried him through bankruptcies, through his insecurities, through the nights he cried because he could never please his mother. He heard every word. He saw his mother treating his wife like a stray dog that had wandered onto the property. He met my eyes for a fraction of a second. In that moment, I begged him silently. Say something, step forward, claim me. Justin looked down. He raised his hand and brushed a speck of invisible dust off his immaculate trousers. Then, he turned his back on me. Come on, Cecilia, he mumbled, his voice soft and spineless, carried away by the wind. Don't make a scene. Mom is upset. Just do as she says. Meet us at the house. He climbed into the warm, leather-scented interior of the Cadillac, sitting next to his mother and his sister, Danielle. I saw Danielle smirk through the tinted window as the door thudded shut. That sound, the heavy, expensive thud of the car door closing, was the sound of my marriage breaking. It was sharper than shrapnel. It hurt more than the time I took a bullet fragment in the shoulder in Kandahar. That was just physical pain. This was the annihilation of 23 years of loyalty. I stood alone on the curb. The wind bit at my ears. The crowd watched, waiting for the trashy soldier wife to scream or cry. I did neither. Tears are a luxury, and I had no luxuries left. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold air. I drew my heels together. Snap. I executed a perfect military about-face, pivoting on my heel and toe with a sharp, disciplined movement that echoed on the pavement. I began to march. Not a walk of shame, but a march. I headed toward the back of the line, past the Bentleys and the Mercedes, toward the rusted sedan of Mrs. Henderson, our elderly neighbor who had been kind enough to come. She waved at me frantically from her driver's seat, her face etched with pity. I opened the back door of her car and slid onto the worn fabric seat. It smelled of old peppermint and dust, a stark contrast to the leather of the Escalade. As Mrs. Henderson put the car in gear to follow the procession, I watched the black Cadillac disappear around the bend. Slowly, involuntarily, my right hand moved up to my left breast pocket. I pressed my palm against the fabric of my uniform, feeling the crinkle of paper underneath. 7 days ago, Andrew had given me an envelope, a mission. Calm down, Sergeant Moss, I whispered to the empty air, my voice steady. I closed my eyes and let the words of Psalm 144:1 wash over me, the verse that had kept me sane in the desert and would keep me sane now. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. They think they just humiliated a poor, helpless widow. They think they've won. Let them laugh in their warm cars. Let them drink their expensive wine. They don't know that the war has just begun. And I am the only one with ammunition. Sitting in the back of Mrs. Henderson's rusting sedan, the smell of old peppermint and stale upholstery filled my nose. It was a comforting, humble smell, miles away from the leather and perfume stench of the Morrison family. But as I watched the gray Virginia landscape roll by through the window, my mind didn't stay in the present. It drifted back, pulled by the gravity of a specific memory. The isolation I felt today wasn't new. It was a cold, familiar roommate. It took me back to last Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is supposed to be the holy grail of American family life. It's about gratitude, unity, and coming together. But in the Morrison household, it was just another stage for a performance I wasn't allowed to star in. I remembered waking up at 4 a.m. that morning. The house was silent, the heating vents humming softly. I went straight to the kitchen, tying on my apron like I was gearing up for a patrol. Samantha had demanded a traditional magazine-cover dinner, which meant everything had to be made from scratch. I spent 12 hours on my feet. I wrestled a 20-pound turkey, brining it, stuffing it with sage and sausage, and basting it every 30 minutes until my face was flushed from the oven heat. I peeled 10 pounds of potatoes for the mash, burned my forearm on a roasting pan while making the candied yams, and reduced fresh cranberries into a sauce so perfect it looked like rubies. By 5 p.m., my back was screaming, and my uniform, a simple blouse and slacks, was damp with sweat and smelled faintly of onion and poultry fat. Just as I was plating the appetizers, Samantha swept into the kitchen. She held a glass of Chardonnay, her silk dress rustling like dry leaves. She stopped in the doorway, wrinkling her nose as she looked me up and down. "Good Lord, Cecilia," she sighed, waving her hand in front of her face. "You smell like a deep fryer. It's absolutely revolting." I wiped my hands on a towel. "I've been cooking for 12 hours, Samantha. The turkey is ready to carve." "Well, you certainly can't come into the dining room looking like that," she said coldly. "You'll ruin the guests' appetites. The stench clings to you. Just stay back here. Plate the food and I'll have the servers take it out. We don't need you hovering over the table." She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me standing there with the turkey platter in my hands. 10 minutes later, the double doors to the dining room swung shut. I could hear them. The clinking of expensive crystal glasses, the scraping of silver forks against fine china, the roar of laughter. I sat down on a hard wooden stool in the corner of the dim kitchen, next to the recycling bin. This was my Thanksgiving dinner. I didn't get the breast meat or the perfectly roasted drumsticks I'd spent hours tending. I ate a burnt turkey wing that had stuck to the bottom of the pan and a scoop of mashed potatoes that I scraped from the side of the pot. Through the gap in the swinging door, I heard Danielle's voice. She was introducing her new boyfriend, a hedge fund manager from New York, to the family. "Oh, the food?" Danielle laughed, her voice shrill. "My sister-in-law made it, Cecilia. She loves this stuff. She's basically born to serve, you know? Like, domestic labor is her hobby. We just let her do it. It keeps her busy." I swallowed the dry meat, feeling it stick in my throat. Then I heard Justin. "My husband." "To family," Justin announced. I could picture him raising his glass, his smile charming and practiced. "To the people who matter most. We are so blessed to be together." He didn't mention me. He didn't wonder where I was. He was toasting to a happy family while his wife ate trash scraps 5 feet away in the dark. I put my fork down. I didn't cry. Soldiers don't cry when they take friendly fire. They just assess the damage. But the hollowness in my chest was expanding, threatening to swallow me whole. Suddenly, the kitchen door creaked open. I straightened up, expecting a server coming for more wine. But it was Andrew. My father-in-law hobbled into the room, leaning heavily on his cane. He looked frail, his tuxedo hanging loosely on his frame, ravaged by the cancer that was already eating his bones. In his trembling hands, he held a pristine white porcelain plate. He didn't say a word at first. He limped over to my corner, pulled up a plastic chair, and sat down opposite me. He placed the plate on the prep table between us. It was piled high with the best cuts of white meat, a generous mound of stuffing, and a slice of warm pumpkin pie. "I'm sorry, Cecilia," he wheezed, his voice rough and wet. "I'm an old man. I don't have the energy to fight her anymore. She makes a scene if I speak up." He looked at my hands. My hands are not soft. They have calluses from holding an M4 carbine and burn marks from his oven. He reached out and covered my rough hand with his paper-thin, cold one. "You cooked this meal," he whispered. "You are the one who feeds this family, not just with food, with your spirit." He looked toward the dining room door, where the laughter was getting louder, more raucous. His eyes darkened with a mixture of shame and anger. "You are my true daughter, Cecilia. Not that girl out there who only comes home when she needs a check signed. If it weren't for you, this house would have collapsed years ago." I looked at this dying Marine, this man who had once commanded battalions but was now a prisoner in his own home. A lump formed in my throat, hot and painful. "Why do you stay, Cecilia?" he asked softly, answering the question I asked myself every day. "I know it's not for Justin. He's lost his way." "I stay for you, Colonel," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He squeezed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong for a dying man. Don't leave me with these vultures, Cecilia. Promise me. They are waiting for me to die so they can pick the meat off my bones. You're the only shield I have left. If you have ever felt unappreciated by the people you sacrifice the most for, or if you believe respect should be earned, please hit that like button right now. And I want to hear from you. Type respect in the comments below if you believe that family is about how you treat people, not just bloodlines. Let's show this family what real loyalty looks like. I made that promise to him in the dim light of the kitchen, amidst the smell of dish soap and leftover gravy. I promised I wouldn't leave. They used me as a maid. They treated me like an ATM to pay off Mark's credit cards, but I took it all. I took every bullet for Andrew. But now, he was gone. The man I protected was in a casket. And as the car turned toward the hospital where he spent his final days, I realized something terrifying. The promise to protect him had expired the moment his heart stopped. Now, a new mission had begun. And God help them, because the shield was gone. Only the sword remained. 3 months before the funeral, the war wasn't being fought in a courtroom or a driveway. It was being fought in room 402 of the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. My father-in-law's bone cancer had metastasized. The doctors gave him until winter. The prognosis was brutal, swift, and agonizing. And just like that, the Morrison family vanished, leaving me to hold the line alone. I took unpaid leave from my job at the logistics firm. I packed a duffel bag and moved into the hospital. For 30 days straight, I lived in a state of suspended animation, existing in the gray twilight between life and death. I didn't sleep in a bed. I slept on a hard, vinyl reclining chair that smelled of industrial disinfectant and other people's grief. My diet consisted of stale ham and cheese sandwiches from the vending machine down the hall and lukewarm coffee that tasted like battery acid. I showered in the sink of the public restroom, scrubbing myself with paper towels and liquid hand soap, trying to wash away the smell of sickness that seemed to seep into my pores. The reality of dying isn't like the movies. There is no soft lighting or violins. It is messy. It is loud. It smells of iodine, blood, and failing organs. I changed Andrew's adult diapers because he was too proud to let the young nurses see him like that. I wiped his forehead when the fever spiked. I held him down when the pain made him thrash and hallucinate about his time in Vietnam. I was the only constant thing in his shrinking world. If I stepped out of the room for even 5 minutes to stretch my legs, his heart rate monitor would spike, the beeping accelerating into a panic until I returned and held his hand. "I'm here, Colonel," I would whisper. "Cecilia is here. Stand down." One afternoon, while I was emptying a bedpan in the ensuite bathroom, my phone buzzed on the bedside table. It was a FaceTime request. I wiped my hands frantically, thinking it might be an emergency. I accepted the call. Samantha's face filled the screen. But she wasn't in a hospital room. She was framed by a backdrop of snow-capped mountains and a roaring stone fireplace. She was wearing a white cashmere turtleneck and holding a glass of red wine. She was in Aspen. Behind her, I could see Mark and Danielle in brand-new, bright neon ski gear, laughing as they adjusted their goggles. The crackle of the fire and the clinking of glasses transmitted clearly over the speakers, a world away from the rhythmic hissing of Andrew's oxygen tank. "How is the situation?" Samantha asked. She didn't ask, "How is he?" or "Is he in pain?" She asked about the situation. Her tone was impatient, like she was asking a contractor why the kitchen renovation wasn't finished yet. "He's stable, Samantha," I said, keeping my voice low so Andrew wouldn't wake. "But he's weak. The morphine drip is maxed out." Samantha sighed, taking a sip of her wine. She looked annoyed. "Still stable?" "The lawyers are pressing me, Cecilia. If he doesn't pass before Friday, it's going to complicate the estate taxes for this fiscal year. We really need that death certificate filed before the quarter ends." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Samantha, he is your husband. He's dying." "I know that," she snapped. "But life goes on and bills pile up. Speaking of which, ask the doctor if there's a way to expedite things, or at least move him to a hospice facility that isn't charging us premium rates." The daily cost at Walter Reed is astronomical, even with his veteran benefits. I have to go, I said, my voice trembling with rage. He's waking up. I ended the call before I threw the phone against the wall. They were skiing. They were drinking vintage Cabernet and worrying about tax brackets while the man who built their fortune was drowning in his own fluids. Justin wasn't in Aspen, but he might as well have been on Mars. He visited exactly once in 3 months. Just once. He walked into the room on a Tuesday morning, wearing a charcoal Italian suit and a tie that cost more than my first car. He stopped at the doorway as if he had hit an invisible wall. He pulled a silk handkerchief from his pocket, doused in some expensive cologne, and pressed it firmly over his nose and mouth. God, Cecilia, he muffled through the silk. The smell, it's unbearable. How can you stand it? He looked at the bed. Andrew was asleep, his mouth open, his skin gray and papery. He looked like a skeleton draped in a sheet. Justin didn't step closer. He looked at his father with the same expression one uses when looking at roadkill. A mixture of pity and revulsion. He looks terrible, Justin said, checking his Rolex. Look, I can't stay. I have a lunch meeting with the developers downtown. I just wanted to, show my face. He might hear you, Justin, I said, standing up from my chair. Come hold his hand, just for a minute. Justin took a step back, visibly recoiling. No, I'm not good with germs and bodily fluids. You handle it, Cecilia. You're used to this kind of dirty work. It suits you. He turned and walked out. He didn't say I love you to his father. He didn't even say goodbye. He fled the room as if death was contagious, leaving me alone with the humming machines. That night was the turning point. It was 3:01 a.m. The hospital wing was quiet, save for the squeak of nurses' shoes in the hallway. I was dozing in the chair when I felt a grip on my wrist. It was tight, painful. My eyes snapped open. Andrew was awake. His eyes, usually cloudy with medication, were suddenly clear. They burned with a terrifying intensity, the eyes of the Marine who had led men into the jungle. He was digging his fingernails into my skin, drawing blood. Cecilia, he rasped. His voice sounded like grinding stones. I'm here, Dad. I'm here. I'm sorry, he whispered, a tear leaking from the corner of his eye and tracking through the stubble on his cheek. I raised. Monsters. They aren't humans, Cecilia. They are vultures. I see them. Circling. He pulled me closer, his breath rattling in his chest. Don't let them pick me clean. Do not let them destroy you. I won't, I promised, stroking his hand. He shook his head violently. No, listening is not enough. You need to fight. He stared straight into my soul, his grip tightening one last time. I have prepared the ammunition for you, Sergeant Moss. I hid it well. When I am gone, you shoot. You shoot to kill. Do you understand me? That is an order. I stared back at him, the weight of his words settling on my shoulders like a rucksack. The gentle father-in-law was gone. The commanding officer had returned for one final briefing. Target acquired, sir, I whispered. He exhaled, a long rattling breath, and his eyes softened. He closed them, a faint smile touching his lips, as if he knew the war was finally in good hands. I didn't know then what the ammunition was. I didn't know about the red wax seal or the encrypted USB drive. But as I sat there in the dark, listening to the rhythm of his failing heart, I knew one thing for certain. The grieving was over. The mission had begun. 7 days before Andrew died, the atmosphere in room 402 changed. It wasn't a hospital room anymore. It was a command post inside enemy territory. It was 2:01 a.m. on a Tuesday. The hospital wing was silent, save for the rhythmic whoosh of the ventilation system. I was dozing in the chair when Andrew made a sound, a sharp, deliberate knock on the metal railing of his bed. I was awake instantly. Dad? Do you need the nurse? Negative, he rasped. His voice was weak, but the fog of medication had lifted from his eyes. They were clear, sharp, and terrifyingly alert. Initiate condition Charlie, Sergeant. My spine straightened. Condition Charlie was old military shorthand we used jokingly during family barbecues to signal unwanted guests approaching. But here, in the sterile gloom of Walter Reed, it meant something else entirely. It meant lockdown. Secure the door, he ordered, pulling the oxygen cannula from his nose with a shaking hand. Check the hallway. Ensure Samantha hasn't planted any listening devices. She's been trying to get power of attorney over my medical decisions all week. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. A dying man, a decorated Marine colonel, was forced to treat his own family like a hostile insurgency. I moved quietly. I checked the hallway. Empty. I checked the flower arrangement on the table, just lilies and roses. I locked the heavy door and pulled the privacy blinds tight. Perimeter clear, Colonel, I whispered, returning to his bedside. Andrew nodded. He reached under his thin mattress, struggling against his own atrophy. His hand emerged holding a thick, cream-colored envelope. It wasn't a standard legal document. It was heavy, sealed with red wax bearing his personal signet ring, a stamp I hadn't seen him use in years. He had been sleeping on this lump of paper for 3 months. Take it, he commanded, thrusting it toward me. His hand was ice cold, the skin translucent like parchment paper, but his grip was iron. I took the envelope. It felt heavy, like it was filled with lead rather than paper. This isn't just a will, Cecilia, he wheezed, blood flecking his lips. This is an indictment. I hired a private investigator 2 years ago, an old friend from the JAG Corps who specializes in fraud. He pointed a trembling finger at the envelope. It's all in there. Mark didn't just have bad luck with his startups. He's been embezzling from the construction firm to pay for high-end escorts and gambling debts in Atlantic City. And Samantha, my dear wife, she sold the confidential bidding specs for the Potomac Bridge project to our competitors. She traded my legacy for cash to buy jewelry. My stomach turned. I knew they were greedy, but corporate espionage and embezzlement were federal crimes. That's just the financial rot, Andrew said, his voice dropping to a grave whisper. He reached under the mattress again. This time, he pulled out a small silver object. A USB drive. But not the kind you buy at an office supply store. This was encased in metal, ruggedized, with a keypad for encryption. Military grade. This, he said, pressing it into my palm, is the smoking gun. It is the evidence of why I am dying faster than the doctors predicted. I froze. I looked at the USB, then at his gaunt face. What are you saying, Dad? Andrew smiled, but there was no humor in it. It was a grim baring of teeth. They switched my meds, Cecilia, 3 weeks ago. I saw Mark fiddling with the IV bag when the nurse was out. They replaced my pain management drip with high-dose digoxin. I gasped, nearly dropping the drive. Digoxin? That's heart medication. In high doses, it causes cardiac arrest, he finished. It mimics natural heart failure. It leaves the system quickly. They aren't waiting for the cancer, Cecilia. They are impatient. They want the payout before the fiscal year ends. We have to call the police, I hissed, standing up. Right now. I'll get the doctors to run a talk screen. Sit down, Andrew barked. It took all his energy, and he fell back against the pillows, gasping. If you call them now, Samantha's lawyers will spin it. They'll say I'm delirious, hallucinating from the brain tumors. They'll destroy the evidence before the cops even get a warrant. We need to strike when they are exposed. He grabbed the collar of my shirt and pulled me down until our foreheads were almost touching. I knew they switched the meds, Cecilia. I watched them do it. Tears pricked my eyes. You knew? And you let them? I needed time, he whispered. If I raised the alarm, they would have found another way. I kept taking the poison so they would think they were winning. It bought me the time I needed to finalize this. He tapped the red-sealed envelope in my hand. The JAG lawyers needed 2 weeks to bulletproof the new will. I bought those 2 weeks with my life. I looked at him with a mixture of horror and awe. This was the ultimate sacrifice. He had walked into an ambush deliberately to ensure the mission was a success. Sergeant Moss, he said, his voice fading now, the energy spent. Here are your orders. Do not show mercy. When they think they have won, when they are celebrating on my grave, you pull the trigger. You bury them. I took the envelope and the USB drive. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to be steady. I unbuttoned my left breast pocket, the pocket closest to my heart, and slid the items inside. I buttoned it shut. I stood up, heels together, back straight. I raised my hand in a slow, crisp salute. Orders received, Colonel. Target acquired. Andrew nodded, his eyes closing as exhaustion overtook him. Good. Now, get out of here. And Cecilia? Yes, sir? When you walk out that door, look defeated, look like I just scolded you. Let them think you're nothing but the help. Don't let them see the soldier until it's too late. Understood. I unlocked the door. I took a deep breath, contorting my face into a mask of sadness and submission. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, hunching my shoulders as if carrying a heavy burden. Down the hall, I saw a nurse looking at me. I lowered my head, staring at the floor, playing the part of the beaten dog. But under my jacket, against my ribs, the metal of the USB drive felt hot, like a live grenade waiting for the pin to be pulled. The transfer was complete. The weapon was secure. Now, I just had to wait for the enemy to gather in the kill zone. The ride back to the Morrison estate was silent, but the house itself was anything but. By the time I arrived in Mrs. Henderson's rattling sedan, the funeral reception was already in full swing. Or rather, the party was. Because that's what this was. It wasn't a wake for a fallen soldier, it was a gala for the vultures who had been circling him. I walked through the front doors of the mansion, a sprawling colonial revival that Andrew had bought 30 years ago, and was immediately hit by a wall of noise and heat. The air inside was thick, suffocatingly warm, and heavy with the scent of decadence. Samantha had spared no expense, using money that technically wasn't hers yet. She had hired a 5-star catering team from Charleston. The smell was intoxicating and nauseating all at once. The rich, earthy aroma of truffle oil, the savory, heavy scent of beef Wellington pastry, and the sharp tang of expensive cheese. Servers in white jackets wove through the crowd with silver trays, pouring Chateau Margaux vintage red wine as if it were tap water. Smooth jazz played from a live quartet in the corner, the saxophone mourning nothing, just providing background noise for conversations about stock portfolios, yacht club memberships, and upcoming winter vacations. No one was talking about Andrew. No one was sharing stories about his bravery in Vietnam or his kindness as a father. They were celebrating the vacancy of the throne. I stood in the corner of the grand living room, pressing my back against the cool plaster wall. I was still in my dress blues. I felt ridiculous, a rigid blue stain in a room full of flowing black silk and Italian wool. But worse than the humiliation was the physical sensation washing over me. I hadn't eaten in 24 hours. Between the stress of the hospital, the funeral preparations, and the shock of the morning, I had missed 3 meals. I have mild hypoglycemia. It's usually manageable, but right now my body was crashing. Cold sweat trickled down my spine, soaking the back of my uniform shirt. Black spots danced in my peripheral vision. My hands, resting by my sides, were trembling uncontrollably. My stomach cramped, a hollow, twisting pain that bent me double. I looked at the plush velvet sofa a few feet away. I wanted nothing more than to sit down for just a minute to stop the room from spinning. But as I took a step toward it, I remembered Samantha's order from 10 minutes ago. She had intercepted me at the door, blocking my entry with a flute of champagne in her hand. "Don't you dare sit on the furniture in that filth," she had sneered, gesturing at my uniform, which had gathered a bit of dust from the wind outside. "I just had the upholstery steam cleaned. Stand in the corner if you must stay inside. Don't ruin my aesthetic." So, I stood. I stood at attention while my blood sugar plummeted and the room swayed like the deck of a ship. A server walked past me, carrying a silver tray. On it sat rows of delicate canapés, blinis topped with crème fraîche and a generous dollop of black caviar. My survival instinct kicked in, overriding my pride. I needed sugar. I needed calories. Or I was going to pass out right here on the Persian rug. I waited until the server turned his back to place the tray on a side table near the window. The guests were distracted, laughing loudly at a joke Mark was telling about a stripper in Atlantic City. I pushed myself off the wall, my legs feeling like lead. I moved to the table. I reached out, my hand shaking, aiming for a single, small piece of toast with caviar. Just one bite. Just enough to keep the darkness at bay. Whack! A sharp, stinging pain exploded across the back of my hand. The sound of the slap was loud, cutting through the jazz music like a gunshot. I recoiled, clutching my hand to my chest. The skin was already turning red. I looked up, stunned. Danielle stood there, her face twisted into a mask of pure revulsion. She had slapped me. My sister-in-law, a woman who had never worked a day in her life, had struck a retired sergeant first class. "Put it down," she hissed, her voice rising an octave, loud enough to turn heads. She pointed at the tray as if I had tried to steal the crown jewels. "Do you have any idea what you're touching? That is beluga caviar. It's $50 a bite." The room went quiet. The jazz quartet faltered for a second, 20 pairs of eyes fixed on me. "Who do you think you are?" Danielle continued, emboldened by the audience. She looked me up and down, her lip curling. "You think because Dad is dead, you can just gorge yourself on our inheritance? You want food? Go to the kitchen. I'm sure the staff has some stale bread in the trash bin. Don't waste the family budget with your greedy mouth." The humiliation hit me harder than the hunger. My face burned. I looked at the red mark on my hand, then at the half-eaten appetizers on the plates of the guests around me. They were wasting thousands of dollars of food, but I wasn't allowed a single bite to stay conscious. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I needed an ally. I needed my husband. I scanned the room desperately. Justin was standing only 10 feet away. He was holding a crystal tumbler of single malt scotch, leaning against the marble fireplace. He was talking to a real estate developer, a man named Henderson. He had seen it. He was facing us. He saw his sister strike his wife. He heard her tell me to eat trash. Our eyes locked. In that split second, time suspended. I waited for him to put down his drink. I waited for the anger to flash in his eyes. I waited for him to march over, grab Danielle's arm, and demand an apology. I waited for him to be the man I thought I married. Justin looked at me. He looked at my shaking hands, my pale face, the uniform that set me apart from his world. Then he shrugged. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, a lifting of the shoulders that said, "What do you want me to do?" He turned back to the developer, taking a sip of his scotch. "Anyway," I heard him say, his voice smooth and unbothered, "I'm thinking about the 911 Turbo. The SUV is practical, sure, but now that the estate is settling, I want something with a little more status." The air left my lungs. It wasn't the slap that broke me. It was the shrug. That shrug was the obituary of our marriage. He didn't just fail to protect me. He chose a hypothetical Porsche over my dignity. He was no longer my husband. He was just another one of them. A vulture in a suit. I took a stumbling step back, gripping the edge of the wall to steady myself. The hunger was still there, clawing at my stomach, but it was drowned out by a cold, hard resolve settling in my chest. Fine, I thought. If I am the enemy, then I will act like one. I was about to turn toward the kitchen, not to eat trash, but to find a glass of water to stabilize my sugar, when a sharp sound rang out. Ting, ting, ting. Harold Brennan, the family's longtime lawyer, was standing in the center of the room, tapping a silver spoon against his champagne flute. He was a small man with a perfectly groomed mustache and eyes that shifted constantly, like a rodent looking for a crumb. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention," Harold announced, his voice oily and projecting well. "Mrs. Morrison has requested a private family convening to read the last will and testament of Colonel Andrew Morrison." A murmur of excitement went through the room. This was the main event, the payout. Would Mrs. Samantha Morrison, Mr. Justin Morrison, Mr. Mark Morrison, and Ms. Danielle Morrison please join me in the study? The big four began to move toward the heavy oak doors of the library. Samantha paused, looking back at me. She smiled, a predatory expression that bared her teeth. "Cecilia," she called out, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You come too," the guest whispered. "Why invite the outcast?" You're not in the will, obviously, Samantha said loudly, enjoying the moment. But we need a witness, and Harold has prepared a non-disclosure agreement and a vacate notice for you to sign. We want you out of the house by tonight, so we might as well get the paperwork done now. She turned and walked into the study. The door stood open, a dark, gaping maw waiting to swallow me whole. It looked like a slaughterhouse entrance. I touched my breast pocket one last time. The metal of the USB drive was warm against my skin. My blood sugar was low, but my adrenaline was spiking. I pushed off the wall. I didn't walk like a hungry, defeated woman. I walked like a soldier entering the kill zone. "Coming, mother," I whispered. I followed them into the dark. The mahogany doors of the study clicked shut behind us, sealing the five of us inside a capsule of suffocating wealth. The room didn't smell like a place of mourning. It smelled like a backroom deal. The air was thick with the blue haze of Cuban cigars, illegal, expensive, and pungent, mixed with the cloying scent of Samantha's Chanel No. 5. Harold Brennan sat behind Andrew's massive oak desk. He looked entirely too comfortable in the chair that used to belong to a war hero. He placed his alligator skin briefcase on the blotter, the gold latches snapping open with a sound like pistol hammers cocking. He didn't look at me. He looked at the paperwork. "Let's make this brief," Harold said, smoothing his mustache. He pulled out a crisp, pristine document. The paper was so new it was still blindingly white. "I have here the last will and testament of Colonel Andrew Morrison, dated and signed on the 1st of this month." My stomach tightened. The 1st of the month? On the 1st of November, Andrew had been in a medically induced coma. He couldn't have signed a birthday card, let alone a complex legal document. Harold cleared his throat and began to read. "Being of sound mind and body, I, Andrew Morrison, hereby revoke all prior wills. I leave 100% of my estate, including the Morrison Construction Group shares, the Virginia property, the Charleston Beach House, and all liquid assets, to my beloved wife, Samantha Morrison, to be distributed to our 3 children at her discretion." Harold paused, finally looking up. He peered over his gold-rimmed spectacles, his eyes landing on me with a sneer that was pure theater. "And regarding Mrs. Cecilia Moss," Harold continued, reading the fabricated words. "The document states, she is an outsider who has contributed nothing to this family's success. Therefore, she is to receive absolutely nothing. No assets, no personal effects, no financial support." For a second, the room was silent. Then, the dam broke. "Yes!" Danielle shrieked, clapping her hands together like a toddler at a birthday party. "Oh my God, finally! I knew Dad would snap out of it at the end." Mark leaned over and slapped Justin on the back, hard. "Congratulations, big brother. We're back in the black. I can finally pay off those guys in Vegas. And hey, I'm ordering that new Range Rover tomorrow, the custom one." Justin let out a long, shuddering breath. His shoulders sagged in relief. The tension leaving his body wasn't grief. It was the relaxation of a man who realized he wouldn't have to work for a living. He smiled, a weak, grateful smile directed at his mother. He didn't look at me. They were celebrating. They were high-fiving over the corpse of the man they had murdered, cheering for the poverty of the woman who had kept him alive. Samantha took a slow sip of her wine, savoring the vintage. She turned to me, her face arranging itself into a mask of fake pity that was far crueler than her anger. "You see, Cecilia," she purred. "Blood always tells. In the end, Andrew knew who his real family was. You were just temporary help." She set her glass down on a coaster. "However, I am not a monster. I don't want the neighbors whispering that I threw a widow onto the street on the night of the funeral. It looks bad for the family brand." She opened her clutch purse. "We have a proposition," Samantha said, her voice dripping with poison. "You have nowhere to go. You have no savings because you spent it all on those ridiculous medical supplies for Andrew. So, out of the goodness of my heart, I am offering you a place to stay." She pulled out a set of keys. They weren't the brass keys to the front door. These were old, iron keys, rusted and jagged. "The old potting shed behind the garden," she said. "You know the one? Where Andrew used to keep the riding lawnmowers and the bags of fertilizer? It has a roof. It has running water. Cold, but it works. If you clean out the spiderwebs and the rat droppings, it's livable. I stared at her. She was offering me a tool shed, a shack that smelled of manure and gasoline. You can live there as an at-will tenant, she continued, enjoying every syllable. Rent-free. In exchange, you will take over the household duties. You will dismiss the expensive cleaning crew. You will do the laundry, including the hand-washables and undergarments. You will scrub the toilets. You will cook our meals. 7 days a week. Consider it, earning your keep. She held the keys out, dangling them over the polished hardwood floor. Well, she asked, do you want a roof over your head, or do you want to sleep under a bridge? She didn't hand them to me. She opened her fingers. Clatter. The heavy keys hit the floor with a harsh, metallic sound. They landed right at the toe of my polished military shoe. Pick them up, Samantha ordered. That is the last mercy this family will ever show you. The silence in the room stretched, tight as a piano wire. Mark snickered. Danielle watched with wide, excited eyes, waiting for my submission. I looked at Justin. This was it, the final test. My husband stood there, looking at the keys on the floor. He looked at his mother, then at me. His eyes were wide, pleading. He nodded slightly toward the ground. Just pick them up, Cecilia, his eyes begged. Just do it. Don't make waves. If you scrub the toilets, I can still buy my Porsche. If you live in the shed, we can still be near each other. He wanted a slave, not a wife. Something inside me, something hot and molten that had been bubbling for 23 years, finally solidified into cold, hard steel. If you would rather sleep in the rain with your dignity than live in a mansion on your knees, hit that like button right now. And I want you to leave a comment below with the word dignity. Let's show these people that self-respect is not for sale. I didn't bend my knee. I didn't crouch. I took a step forward. My heel came down, crunch, right next to the keys. I stepped over them. I stepped over their offer, over their mercy, over the last shred of my marriage. I walked straight past Samantha, who flinched as if I were about to strike her. I walked past Justin, who was shrinking into the background like the coward he was. I marched directly to the desk. I planted my hands on the leather surface and leaned in, my face inches from Harold's. The lawyer recoiled, the smell of his expensive cologne overpowered by the sheer intensity of my presence. Lawyer Brennan, I said. My voice wasn't loud. It was a low rumble, resonating from the chest, the voice of a non-commissioned officer addressing a subordinate who had just made a fatal error. You are a civilian lawyer, so you might think you're smart, I said, locking eyes with him. But you just made a tactical error. I pointed at the pristine white document in his hands. You just read a fraudulent document into the record, I stated clearly. Andrew Morrison was in a medically induced coma on November 1st. I have the hospital logs to prove it. You have just committed federal evidence tampering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and grand larceny. Harold's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His face turned the color of ash. And guess what? I reached into my breast pocket. I didn't come alone. I ripped the red wax-sealed envelope from my uniform. The sound of tearing paper was the loudest thing in the room. Let me show you what a real will looks like. For a split second, the room was silent. Then it erupted into laughter. It wasn't nervous laughter. It was the deep, belly-shaking laughter of people who believe they are untouchable. Mark threw his head back, exhaling a cloud of cigar smoke directly into my face. You've lost your mind, Cecilia, Mark sneered, flicking ash onto the carpet. Federal evidence tampering? What are you, a lawyer now? You're just a glorified cook who watches too many crime shows. Get out of here before I have security throw you out. Samantha shook her head, looking at me with pity. Poor thing. Grief has made her delusional. Harold, ignore her. I didn't respond. I didn't blink. My hand moved to my breast pocket. In one fluid motion, I withdrew the thick, cream-colored envelope. I raised it high, letting the light catch the heavy, dark red wax seal stamped with the eagle of the Judge Advocate General's Corps. I slammed it down onto the desk. Thud. The sound was heavy, solid, and final. It sounded like a gavel striking a block. Harold jumped, dropping his expensive Mont Blanc pen. It rolled across the desk and fell to the floor, but he didn't reach for it. His eyes were glued to the red seal. "I am not a lawyer," I said, my voice cutting through their laughter like a knife through silk. "I am the sole beneficiary named in this document. This is a military testament, drafted by a colonel of the JAG Corps, notarized by the Department of Defense, and filed in federal records." I leaned in, staring straight at Samantha. "This document supersedes your little civilian piece of paper. In a federal court, yours is just a napkin." Harold reached out, his hand trembling, trying to snatch the envelope. I said, snatching it back with reflexes honed in combat zones. "You don't get to touch this, Harold. You've already proven you can't be trusted with paper." I reached into the pocket again. "But don't worry, I have something else for you to look at." I pulled out the silver, military-grade USB drive. It glinted coldly under the chandelier light. "You all think Andrew was senile," I said, walking over to the laptop sitting on the side table, the one Harold was using to project his fraudulent spreadsheet onto the massive 80-inch television mounted on the wall. "You think he didn't know what was happening in his own house?" "What are you doing?" Samantha demanded, her voice rising in panic. "Don't you dare touch that computer." "Cecilia, stop it," Justin pleaded weakly. "You're embarrassing yourself." I ignored them. I plugged the drive into the USB port. The screen flickered. "You thought the room was private," I said, my fingers flying across the trackpad. "But Andrew was a soldier. He knew that in war, intelligence is everything." I hit the enter key. The spreadsheet vanished from the giant screen. The room plunged into a different kind of light, the grainy, high-contrast black and white of a covert security camera. The timestamp in the corner read, October 28th, 11:42 p.m., 2 weeks ago. The audio crackled to life, loud and undeniable, filling the acoustic space of the study. On the screen, 3 figures were sitting in this very room. Samantha was in the high-backed chair. Mark was leaning against the desk. Harold was sitting opposite them. The video quality was sharp enough to see the sweat on Mark's forehead. "The old man is holding on too long." Samantha's voice rang out from the TV speakers. It was the same voice she used to complain about slow service at a restaurant. Annoyed, impatient. "The regular morphine isn't working fast enough. Mark, did you switch the medication like we discussed?" In the room, the real Samantha gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. On the screen, Mark nodded. "Yeah, Mom. I swapped the IV bag this morning. I replaced the pain management drip with high-dose digoxin. The doctor said if he gets too much, it'll cause respiratory failure that looks exactly like natural causes." "Good," Samantha said on screen. "We need him gone before the fiscal quarter ends." The camera panned slightly to Harold. "I'll redraft the will," the video Harold said. "I'll backdate it to November 1st. Just make sure he's dead by the weekend so no one asks questions about his lucid intervals. I'll handle the rest." "Done." Mark laughed on screen. "Cheers to the new empire." The video cut to black. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. The only sound was the soft whirring of the air conditioning and the frantic, shallow breathing of the people in the room. Smash! Mark's hand had gone numb. His crystal wine glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor. The expensive red wine splashed outward, soaking into the Persian rug, looking dark and viscous. Like blood. Samantha was frozen in her chair. Her face had drained of all color, leaving her looking like a wax statue. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The arrogance, the entitlement, the power. It had all evaporated in 60 seconds of grainy footage. Harold looked like he was having a stroke. He was gripping the edge of the desk so hard his knuckles were white, staring at the blank TV screen as if he had seen a ghost. And Justin. I looked at my husband. He was standing in the middle of the room, staring at his mother and brother with wide, horrified eyes. He hadn't known. I could see it in his face. He knew they were greedy, he knew they were cruel, but he didn't know they were murderers. But as I watched him, I felt no pity. Only disgust. "You see them now, Justin?" I asked softly. "You stood by them. You let them treat your father like garbage. You let them treat me like a slave. Your silence didn't just break our marriage, it bought them the time to kill him. Justin looked at me, tears streaming down his face. He opened his mouth to speak, to apologize, to beg, but I cut him off. I pulled the USB drive out of the laptop and held it up. It caught the light like a holy relic. This isn't a civil dispute anymore, I announced, my voice booming with the authority of a sergeant on the drill field. This isn't about who gets the beach house or the cars. This is evidence item number 1. I checked my watch. I sent a digital copy of this file to the sheriff's department and the district attorney's office exactly 1 hour ago. They are currently en route. No, Samantha whispered, finally finding her voice. It was a broken, jagged sound. No, you didn't. You wouldn't destroy the family. The family? I laughed, a harsh, dry sound. Samantha, you destroyed this family the moment you decided a tax break was worth more than your husband's life. I pointed at the door, where the faint sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder with every second. You wanted to know my place? I asked, looking at the terrified group before me. My place is the witness stand. Your place is a federal prison cell. Prepare for extraction, I whispered to myself. Hostiles neutralized. The sirens were getting louder, wailing like banshees in the distance, but inside the study, the denial was just as deafening. Samantha was the first to snap out of the paralysis. She stood up, her hands shaking violently as she smoothed her disheveled hair. She took a deep breath, trying to summon the imperious matriarch who had ruled Virginia society for 40 years. It's a fake, she shrieked, her voice cracking. She pointed a trembling finger at the television screen, which had gone black. That video is a deep fake. Technology can do anything these days. You manipulated it, Cecilia. You forced a confused, dying old man to say those things under duress. She turned to Harold, her eyes wide and manic. Tell her, Harold. Tell her it doesn't matter. I am the legal spouse. Virginia is an equitable distribution state. Even if there is a new will, I'm entitled to my share. This is community property. She slammed her hand on the desk, rattling the lamp. You cannot steal my company, Cecilia. I will sue you in every court from here to the Supreme Court. I will bury you in litigation until you are begging for mercy. Harold Brennan wiped a bead of sweat from his upper lip with a silk handkerchief. He nodded rapidly, clinging to the only lifeline he understood: bureaucracy. She has a point, Harold stammered, his voice thin. The video, while disturbing, does not definitively prove Colonel Morrison had testamentary capacity when he signed your document. We can contest the JAG will. We can tie this up in probate for years. The assets will be frozen. You won't see a dime. They were desperate. They were staring down the barrel of a murder charge, yet their first instinct wasn't to call a criminal defense attorney. It was to secure the money. In their twisted minds, if they still had the millions, they could buy their way out of prison. I looked at them, and for the first time that day, I smiled. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the terrifying cold smile of a sniper who has just adjusted for windage and elevation. You poor, stupid fools, I said softly. I reached into the leather portfolio I had brought with me, the one sitting beneath the JAG envelope. I pulled out a plain, yellow legal folder. It looked innocuous compared to the wax-sealed envelope, but it was far more dangerous. You are fighting over a corpse, I said, sliding the folder across the desk toward Harold. You are so obsessed with the will, with the inheritance, with the empire. But you never bothered to check the books. What are you talking about? Justin asked, his voice trembling. The Morrison Construction Group, I said, locking eyes with my husband. The company you've been running as CEO for the past 5 years. Tell me, Justin, did you ever actually look at the balance sheet? Or were you too busy expensing your trips to Cabo? Justin blanched. We had some cash flow issues. The market is down. The market is fine, I corrected. You, however, are incompetent. The company is leveraged to the hilt. You borrowed against the assets to cover your bad investments. The Morrison Construction Group is currently $50 million in debt. It is insolvent. It is a sinking ship. Liar! Samantha screamed. We are worth millions. You were, I said. But Andrew knew the ship was going down. He knew Justin was driving it into an iceberg. And he knew you, Samantha, would strip the copper wiring out of the walls before you let it sink. I flipped the yellow folder open. Andrew was a soldier. He understood the strategy of defense in depth. He didn't just write a new will, Samantha. He moved the supply lines. I pointed to the documents clipped inside. 3 years ago, Andrew established an irrevocable trust. Do you know what that is, Harold? Harold slumped in his chair, looking like he had been punched in the gut. An irrevocable trust removes assets from the grantor's estate, he whispered. They are no longer subject to probate. They don't belong to the deceased anymore. Exactly, I said. The entity is called the Cecilia Trust. And over the last 3 years, every time one of you showed your true colors, Andrew transferred a piece of his legacy into it. He emptied his own pockets to fill mine. I turned the pages, reading the timeline of their destruction like a judge reading a verdict. January 15th, 2021, I read aloud. Transfer of 40% of the preferred stock and voting rights. I looked at Justin. Do you remember that day? That was the day Andrew fell in the bathroom and broke his hip. He called you 3 times. You didn't answer because you were on the 9th hole at Myrtle Beach with your mistress, Tiffany. You told him later that work was crazy. He transferred the stock the next morning. Justin grabbed the edge of the desk, swaying as if he were about to faint. I flipped the page. March 3rd, 2022, I continued. Transfer of the diversified investment portfolio. Current value, $2.5 million. I looked at Samantha. The charity gala. You had a bit too much champagne. You told the mayor's wife, loudly enough for everyone to hear, that your daughter-in-law was a low-class mercenary who was only sticking around for the money. Andrew heard you. He transferred the cash assets that night. Samantha's mouth hung open, a silent scream trapped in her throat. I flipped to the last page. June 12th, 2023. I read. Transfer of the Charleston Beach House and the land deeds in Virginia. I looked at Mark. You asked Andrew for a loan to cover your gambling debts. When he refused, you called him a stingy, useless old bastard and told him to hurry up and die. He signed the deed over to the trust an hour later. I slammed the folder shut. Bam! The sound echoed in the silent room. Do you understand now? I asked, my voice calm and deadly. The will I showed you earlier. It governs an estate that consists of nothing but debt and a house with a second mortgage. When Andrew Morrison died in that hospital bed, legally speaking, he was a destitute man. He owned nothing. I leaned forward, delivering the final blow. You poisoned him. You risked life in prison. You sold your souls to the devil. And you did it all to inherit absolutely nothing. You killed him for air. The realization hit them like a physical shockwave. Mark collapsed. He didn't just sit down. His legs gave out, and he slid to the floor, burying his face in his hands, letting out a guttural, animalistic howl of despair. Samantha stared at the wall, her eyes unfocused. The logic of her world, where money solved everything, had shattered. She wasn't just a criminal. She was broke. She was a destitute widow facing a murder charge with no funds to hire a dream team defense. Justin looked at me, his face pale and wet with tears. Cecilia, you have it all? The house? The money? I do, I said, picking up the folder. And unlike you, I know exactly what to do with it. Outside, the sirens stopped. Heavy boots were pounding on the front porch. The flashing blue and red lights danced through the window curtains, painting the terrified faces of the Morrison family in the colors of the American justice system. Game over, I whispered. The sound of the front door being breached was not a knock. It was an explosion. Crash! The heavy oak double doors, which had barred the poor from entering the Morrison estate for decades, splintered inward under the force of a battering ram. The noise reverberated through the house like a thunderclap, instantly drowning out Samantha's screams of denial. Police! Search warrant! Everybody down! A tactical team swarmed into the study, their boots heavy on the hardwood floors, their weapons drawn and leveled. The peaceful, stuffy atmosphere of the library was shattered by the chaotic, adrenaline-fueled energy of a raid. Leading the charge was Detective Frank Morrison, no relation to my husband's family, just a happy coincidence of fate. He was a man I had spoken to an hour ago, a man who respected evidence more than net worth. Harold Brennan, Samantha Morrison, Mark Morrison. Detective Morrison bellowed, his voice filling the room. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and evidence tampering. Harold, the weasel lawyer, reacted first. Panic overrode his logic. He scrambled backward, knocking over his expensive leather chair, and bolted toward the French doors leading to the garden. He didn't make it 3 steps. A uniformed officer tackled him with the force of a linebacker. Harold hit the floor hard, thud, his glasses flying off, his face pressed into the Persian rug he had been standing on so arrogantly just moments before. Stop resisting, the officer shouted, wrenching Harold's arms behind his back. The metallic click, click, click of the handcuffs was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Samantha was backed into the corner, clutching her pearls as if they could protect her from the law. Don't you touch me, she screeched as a female officer approached her. Do you know who I am? I am Mrs. Andrew Morrison. I had lunch with the senator last week. I will have your badge for this. You can tell that to the judge, ma'am, the officer said impassively. She grabbed Samantha's wrists that had never known a day of hard labor, and snapped the cold steel cuffs onto them. You have the right to remain silent. The officer began reciting the Miranda warning, her voice monotonous and professional. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Samantha struggled, her eyes wild, looking for someone, anyone, to save her. But there was no one. Her money was gone. Her status was a myth. She was just a suspect in a homicide. As the officers began to haul them out, I stepped forward. I wasn't done yet. Mark was being led past me, weeping openly. Snot was running down his nose, ruining his silk shirt. He looked like a terrified child. Officer, a moment, please, I said. The officer paused. Mark looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. Cecilia, please, help me. I didn't mean to. Mom made me do it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a tissue. Mark, I said, my voice steady. Do you recognize this? He squinted at it through his tears. It was a promissory note. A dirty, crumpled IOU signed in a back room in Las Vegas. The loan sharks you borrowed $500,000 from? I asked. They were threatening to break your legs last month. Andrew found out. He bought the debt to keep you safe. Mark's eyes went wide with a flicker of hope. Dad paid it. Dad bought the note, I corrected him. He didn't forgive the debt. He became the lender. I leaned in close, so only he could hear. And since I am the sole beneficiary of his estate, I am now your creditor. And unlike your father, I don't have a soft spot for you. I tucked the paper into his handcuffed hands. I've already filed the paperwork to repossess your Porsche and foreclose on your condo downtown. The repo men will be there tomorrow morning at 8:00 a.m. Good luck making new friends in prison when you can't buy them drinks. Mark's knees buckled. He let out a sob of pure despair as the officer dragged him toward the door. He was going to prison, and he would come out to absolutely nothing. I turned my attention to the corner of the room. Danielle was standing there, shaking like a leaf. She hadn't been arrested yet. She wasn't in the video. She hadn't been part of the murder plot, just a beneficiary of the cruelty. She was hugging herself, trying to make herself invisible. I didn't do anything, she stammered as I approached her. You can't touch me. I wasn't on the tape. No, you weren't, I agreed. You're not going to jail, Danielle. You just have to live in this town. I tossed a stack of glossy 4x6 photographs onto the side table next to her. They fanned out like a deck of cards. They were high-resolution photos taken by the private investigator. They showed Danielle in very compromising positions. In a hotel room, in a car. That's... Danielle gasped, her face draining of blood. That's Paul, I said. Your best friend's husband, the man you were hugging and crying with at the funeral this morning, the man whose wife, your bestie, was holding your hand while you comforted her. Danielle lunged for the photos, her nails clawing at the table to gather them up. You bitch, give those to me. A female officer stepped between us, blocking Danielle with a stern look. Back off, ma'am. I think Paul's wife would be very interested in this portfolio, I said calmly. In fact, I think the entire country club would find it fascinating. Your social standing is built on a house of cards, Danielle. And I just turned on the fan. Danielle sank to the floor, clutching the photos to her chest, wailing. She knew it was over. In Virginia high society, a scandal like this was a social death sentence. She would be pariah. Finally, they brought Samantha to the door. The Grand Dame of Virginia looked like a wreck. Her expensive fur coat was sliding off one shoulder. Her mascara was running in black streaks down her face, making her look like a grotesque clown. Her hair, usually sprayed into a concrete helmet of perfection, was wild and matted. She stopped when she saw me. The hate in her eyes was palpable, burning hot enough to blister paint. "You ungrateful peasant," she spat, struggling against the officer's grip. "I took you in. I let you marry my son. This is how you repay me?" I stood tall. I smoothed the front of my army dress blues. I adjusted the Medal of Commendation on my chest so it hung perfectly straight. "You didn't take me in, Samantha," I said. "You tried to break me." I stepped closer, invading her personal space just as she had done to me in the church parking lot this morning. "You told me to know my place," I whispered, my voice hard as granite. I gestured to the room around me, the house that was now mine. Then I gestured to the handcuffs biting into her wrists. "I know my place, Samantha. My place is the victor. My place is the owner of this house." I looked her dead in the eye. "And your place? Your place is a 6x8 cell. Now, get out of my sight." "Get her out of here," Detective Morrison ordered. The officers shoved her forward. Samantha stumbled, losing one of her high heels. She had to limp out the door, uneven and broken, dragged past the neighbors who had gathered on the lawn to watch the spectacle. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers painted her face in alternating shades of shame. I watched until the heavy oak door was pulled shut, cutting off her screaming. The room fell silent. The storm had passed. The air was still thick with the smell of spilled wine and fear, but the rot had been cut out. Well, almost all of it. I turned slowly. Justin was still standing in the middle of the room. He was the only one left. He wasn't in handcuffs. He wasn't crying anymore. He was just standing there, looking at me with the pathetic eyes of a lost dog that realizes its master has left the gate open. He took a tentative step toward me. "Cecilia?" I held up a hand. The final purge wasn't over yet. The silence that followed the raid was heavier than the noise. The police cruisers had finally pulled away, their red and blue lights fading into the distance like a receding storm. The front door, splintered and hanging off one hinge, let in a draft of cold November air that swirled through the grand foyer. The house was empty now. The guests had fled the moment the handcuffs came out, scattering like cockroaches when the kitchen light is turned on. The catering staff had abandoned their stations, leaving half-poured bottles of wine and trays of melting hors d'oeuvres on the sideboards. I stood in the center of the living room, the scene of the crime and the scene of my victory. I took a deep breath. For the first time in 23 years, the air in this house didn't smell of judgment or pretense. It smelled of justice. But I wasn't entirely alone. There was a movement to my left. Justin emerged from the shadows of the hallway. He looked like a ghost. His custom-tailored suit was rumpled, his tie loosened, his face pale and slack. He looked around the wrecked room, then at the empty driveway where his mother and brother had been hauled away. And finally, his eyes landed on me. He didn't look angry. He looked terrified. He looked like a child who had lost his parent in a supermarket. He rushed toward me, stumbling over a fallen chair. He threw himself at my feet, his knees hitting the hardwood floor with a painful thud. "Cecilia," he choked out, his hands reaching for the hem of my army dress blues trousers. "Cecilia, please, you have to listen to me." I didn't move. I looked down at him, at the top of his perfectly styled hair, now disheveled. "I didn't know," he sobbed, gripping my pant leg. "I swear to God, Cecilia, I didn't know they were killing him. I thought we were just protecting the inheritance. I'm not a murderer. You know me. I'm weak. Mom, she always controlled everything. She manipulated me. He looked up, tears streaming down his face, ruining the expensive silk of his tie. We've been married for 23 years, Cece. You can't leave me. Not now. I have no one else. Mark is gone. Mom is gone. You're all I have left. His tears soaked into the fabric of my uniform. The uniform I'd ironed myself this morning. The uniform his mother had called a costume. I felt nothing. No pity, no love, no anger. Just a profound clinical detachment. I took a step back, shaking my leg to dislodge his grip. It was the same motion one uses to shake off a leech that has attached itself in a swamp. "Get up, Justin," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of any warmth. "Don't disgrace the uniform. You are kneeling in front of a sergeant." He scrambled to his feet, wiping his nose, a flicker of hope in his eyes. So we can work this out? I can change, Cecilia. I can be the husband you need. I'll fire the staff. We can... Stop, I cut him off. I reached into my leather portfolio one last time. There was one document left. It wasn't in a wax-sealed envelope, and it wasn't on a USB drive. It was a standard legal filing, stapled and crisp. "In the military," I said, holding the document out to him, "we have a code. You never leave a fallen comrade behind. You cover their six. You bleed for them." I looked him dead in the eye. "This morning, in the church parking lot, I was under fire. Your mother and sister were attacking my honor, my service, and my dignity. And you stood there." Justin flinched. "You didn't just stand there," I continued. "You dusted off your pants. You looked away. You prioritized your comfort over my existence. That silence, Justin, was the loudest betrayal of my life." I slapped the papers against his chest. He grabbed them reflexively. "What is this?" he whispered. "Divorce papers," I said. "Signed, notarized, and filed as of this morning. I prepared them the same day Andrew gave me the evidence." Justin stared at the papers, his mouth opening and closing. "Consider this your dishonorable discharge," I said, using the term reserved for the most shameful expulsion from service. "You have failed in your duties as a husband. You have been found wanting in character, loyalty, and courage. You are stripped of rank. You are stripped of benefits. Cecilia, you can't..." "I can," I said, "and I have. This house is mine now. The trust fund is mine. The company, what's left of it, is mine. You are trespassing." I pointed to the shattered front door. "Pack a bag. You have 10 minutes. After that, I'm calling the deputies back to remove an intruder." Justin looked at me, searching for any trace of the woman who used to cook his meals and iron his shirts. But that woman was gone. She had died in the kitchen last Thanksgiving. Standing in her place was a soldier who had just won a war. He slumped. The fight went out of him. He turned and walked toward the stairs, his posture hunched, a broken man walking into a future of mediocrity and debt. I didn't watch him go. I turned my back on him. I walked into the dining room. The long mahogany table was littered with half-empty wine glasses and crumpled linen napkins. At the far end stood the head of the table, a massive, high-backed chair with carved armrests. For 30 years, only Andrew sat there. When he got sick, Samantha claimed it. It was the seat of power, the seat of the commander. I walked over to it. I pulled it out. The legs scraped against the floor, a sound of ownership. I sat down. The chair was comfortable. It felt right. From here, I could see the entire room. I could see the garden. I could see the remnants of the empire I had just toppled. My eyes landed on a silver platter near my elbow. On it, lonely and untouched, sat a single canapé. A blini topped with creme fraiche and black beluga caviar. The same appetizer Danielle had slapped out of my hand an hour ago. The $50 bite I wasn't worthy of. I picked it up. I examined it for a moment, the black pearls glistening under the chandelier light. Then, I popped it into my mouth. I chewed slowly. It was salty, rich, and cold. But mostly, it tasted like victory. It tasted like freedom. I swallowed, feeling the nourishment hit my bloodstream. I wasn't hungry anymore. Through the French windows, the late afternoon sun was beginning to set. The golden hour light streamed into the room, hitting the ribbons on my chest. The Army Commendation Medal, the Good Conduct Medal, the National Defense Service Medal. They gleamed like fire. Beyond the glass, in the center of the garden, the American flag on Andrew's flagpole was snapping in the crisp November wind. It was flying high and proud. I reached for a bottle of Chateau Margaux that had been left on the table. I poured a glass, the dark red liquid swirling into the crystal goblet. I raised the glass toward the window, toward the garden, toward the sky where I knew an old Marine was watching. "You see that, Dad?" I whispered to the empty room. I cleared the weeds. The perimeter is secure. I took a sip of the wine. It was smooth, complex, and deeply satisfying. A sense of peace settled over me, warmer than the alcohol. I wasn't the unwanted daughter-in-law. I wasn't the betrayed wife. I was Cecilia Moss, homeowner, survivor, commander of my own life. I set the glass down. I smoothed my uniform one last time, resting my hands on the arms of the big chair. "Mission accomplished," I said into the silence. "Dismissed." My story wasn't just about revenge. It was about the high cost of dignity. For 23 years, I thought that keeping the peace meant swallowing my pride. I thought that if I sacrificed enough, they would eventually love me. But Andrew taught me the most valuable lesson of all. You cannot save people who are determined to destroy you. And you should never set yourself on fire just to keep ungrateful people warm. If you are currently in a situation where your kindness is being mistaken for weakness, remember this. You teach people how to treat you. Silence isn't always submission. Sometimes it is simply the time you spend reloading. Preparation is your armor, and self-respect is the only weapon you need. Don't wait for permission to save yourself. Issue the order today. Now, I want to turn the conversation over to you. Look at your own life right now. Are you sitting at the head of your own table, or are you shrinking in the corner, letting someone else dictate your worth? If this story gave you a spark of courage, or if you simply enjoyed seeing justice served, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I have many more stories from the archives to share. And finally, I have a challenge for you. Go to the comments section and type one single word: Commander. Let it be a public promise to yourself that from this day forward, you are the only one in charge of your destiny. Thank you for listening, and stand tall.